We are also functioning with moderated unmute mode today, so if there is something that you would like to say verbally or elaborate on, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you on our side so you can go ahead and speak. And finally, last housekeeping item here, today's recording and presentation materials will be posted on DMM under case 18E0138. So the Commission has a number of active and in development programs related to EVs spread across a handful of proceedings, as you can see here, including those focused on medium heavy-duty vehicles and on proactively planning for new EV load. And we highly encourage you to learn and get involved in any of the EV work on the screen. And those case numbers are also on the slide here in those darker kind of subheading areas for you to look up on your own. But for today, the programs that we're focused on are highlighted in the blue text and sit within our light duty proceeding and our demand charge alternative proceeding. For those who may be newer to the programs, the JU will go into more detail on how the programs work in a little bit during their presentations. But for now, we'll get into what the reviews will focus on and what the process will look like. The Commission directed staff to review the Make Ready program at the earlier of when 70% of the total statewide plug goals for L2 and DCFC are committed or completed, or no later than November 16th of this year. The JU has recently reached that 70% threshold. As many of you may know or have participated in, the Make Ready program went through a midpoint review about 2 years ago. That review was wide-ranging, looking at nearly all aspects of the program, as well as other smaller programs that were authorized through the Make Ready order, for example, the medium heavy-duty pilot. But for this review, the Commission has directed staff to review 6 components of the light-duty Make Ready program on your screen: program effectiveness, progress towards plug goals, budget modifications, the impact of proprietary technologies, ramping down of the incentive allocations, and cost containment. And in the Commission's words, this review is meant to limit uncertainty in the market and facilitate a smooth transition of the ramping down of the program. The LMTIP, on the other hand, will be undergoing its first review since it was established last year. This review was directed to begin at the earlier of when the first utility spends 70% of its budget, or as part of this Make Ready program review. And the directive here is pretty straight and to the point. It's to evaluate outcomes of the utility's LMTIP implementations to date and whether the LMTIP programs should be reauthorized. As both the Make Ready program and LMTIP are undergoing review at the same time, they will be on similar action timelines. So the LMTIP review launched on March 6th with a Secretary's notice posing staff questions about the program, with comments due by March 28th. The Make Ready program review officially kicked off with a Secretary's notice filed on March 12th. This notice included questions from staff pertaining to the 6 topics of focus on the prior slides, and which are intended to gauge the current program's advantages and difficulties to assist with future recommendations for program design. Those comments are due by April 11th. And for both programs, we highly, highly encourage all of you to submit comments. Your responses are just immensely valuable as we work through the review process, and we say it a lot because it's true. We really, need your thoughts on the record to guide our decision-making process. So please check out those stakeholder questions if you haven't already. So following the comments, we expect to hold technical conferences and additional stakeholder meetings as needed on areas of interest during the spring. If you have any suggestions for topics, you are always welcome to include those in your comments as well. And taking that all together with additional analysis on our side, staff will then publish a white paper or white papers, and that would then have a 60-day public notice and comment period, at some point after which a commission order would conclude the process. So with that, we'll turn to our first Q&A period. My colleagues and I are here to answer any questions you have. And as mentioned, we'll be using that designated Q&A feature in the bottom right of your screen that you can go ahead and send questions to. Okay, we have our first question here from Tom Miller. Do you expect to have this entire process completed in 2025? So I'll ask if our counsel, Stephanie McDermott, wants to handle that question.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you so much for the question, Tom. So we can't say exactly when the commission will act. The commission sets its own agenda. We can only make recommendations for when it should address something. We're hopeful to have it completed in 2025, but at this point, we can't say for certain.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, so not seeing any other questions at the moment. We'll give it maybe, just 10 more seconds in case anyone else has a question, but then we can switch over to the JU presentation. All right, so I'll go ahead and stop sharing. JU can begin to share their slides. I did see one more question come in during that, asking for links for the LMTIP and Make Ready comments. We will work on seeing if we can get something to drop in there for you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Katie Zellner from Con Edison. I will be kicking off the joint utilities portion of the presentation where we share our progress on the EV Make Ready program and the Load Management Technology Incentive Program as part of this review kickoff. You'll also see that my colleagues from Con Edison, Allison Gao and Grace Kirkpatrick, will be presenting today, but we'll be speaking through Allison's speaker just to keep everyone on their toes. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So to start off with our agenda, we'll offer a bit of a program overview explaining what the eligibility criteria are and what the structure of these two programs in question are. And then we'll go through the state of EV charging in New York and how the Make Ready program has advanced EV charging across the state. Next, we'll review learnings and some considerations for the future. And then finally, we'll offer program status updates focused on the Make Ready program downstate, the Make Ready program upstate, and the statewide Load Management Technology Incentive Program overview, including a status update there. And then we'll have time for Q&A. Next slide, please. Okay, so launching into the program overview, starting with the Make Ready program. This program was authorized in 2020 by the Public Service Commission with a $1.24 billion budget that offers incentives for bringing electricity to EV charging equipment. We have programs across the joint utilities that support customers installing level 2 chargers that often support overnight charging or longer duration charging, and also a program with incentives supporting direct current fast charging. The initial targets that were set in 2020 were expanded in the 2023 midpoint order. You can see that the collective targets that were set in the midpoint order are there on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So across the joint utilities, just over 38,300 level 2 plugs or L2 plugs, and just over 6,300 DCFC plugs. Those are the fast charging plugs across the joint utility service territories. This program was set for a 5-year time period, although the midpoint order does allow for the budget to be spent after the end of 2025 if there is budget remaining and if the max per utility program plug targets have not been met. So with that, that's the overview of the Make Ready program in terms of the overarching structure. We'll go to the next slide to look at what is eligible for these incentives. So as I mentioned, the incentives are covering costs associated with bringing electricity from the grid to the EV chargers themselves. This includes equipment that would be on the utility side of the meter, that the utility sides, as well as equipment on the customer side of the meter, shown there in the middle portion of this graphic. On the right-hand side of this graphic, you can see that the charger itself, including some things like network fees and some of the maintenance of the chargers themselves, are not eligible for Make Ready program incentives. The incentives are designed around 3 incentive tiers that are described on the far right-hand side of the screen. So there's an enhanced tier for disadvantaged community benefiting plugs. Those plugs and the upgrades needed to support them are eligible for up to 100% of costs being covered. In the L2 context, that includes level 2 infrastructure upgrades at eligible multi-unit dwellings, as well as level 2 infrastructure upgrades for curbside charging in disadvantaged community or public fast charging in disadvantaged communities, which are those census tracts designated by the state. Also, the 90% tier supports public charging. Those would be charging infrastructure upgrades that are eligible for up to 90% of costs covered for the equipment that you see on the left-hand side of the screen. Those sites, in order to be eligible for the up to 90% tier, must be publicly accessible and include non-proprietary plugs. And then lastly, privately accessible plugs or proprietary sites are eligible for up to 50% of costs being covered. Each of these tiers is also associated with a $1 per plug or $1 per kW cost cap, and whichever cap is reached first is what limits the incentive amount the customer would receive. And then we can advance to the next slide, and I will pass it over to my colleague, Josh Kaplan, to walk through the Load Management Technology Incentive Program.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Kaplan, and I work for National Grid. And I'll start by sharing about the overview of the Load Management Technology Incentive Program, or LMTIP. So as Lindsay had shared, the LMTIP program was reallocated from the DCFC per plug incentive program, and it contains about $25 million of incentives for that are eligible for customers in the joint utility service territories. In this program, we offer incentives in a similar format to Make Ready for equipment and software for customer-side demand management. So some of the eligible types of equipment include load management hardware, load management software, energy storage that is integrated into an EVSC, as well as energy storage that is standalone from the EVSC, all with the goal of supporting EV charging and managing the customer's demand. Each of the joint utilities has has begun to start offering these incentives. We opened our programs in October or November of 2024, and the incentive tiers vary by the technology segments that are being included in the project. And a little detail of that is on the screen, and more detail, if you need, can be gathered from the utility web pages. So with that, we'll continue on to the main part about the state of EV charging in New York, as well as the role the Make Ready program has played. So going forward from here, we're going to mainly cover 3 different sections. The first is going to talk about the successes of the Make Ready program and how it's been helpful in supporting the EV adoption goals of New York State. After that, we'll get into a section around some of our key findings and identifying some opportunities to continue to grow this successful program into the future. And finally, we'll get into some detailed stats and statistics about the program and what that could help inform a future phase of the program. So kicking off into the section around how the Make Ready program has been successful. To start, so far, we have completed plugs 47% and 43% of the upstate and downstate respective targets of combined level 2 and DCFC, as well under contract or under commitment, as you'll hear us talk about. We have 67% and 79% of the targets covered. And when you hear that topic of under contract or under commitment, that means that the utility and the customer have signed an agreement about the work that's going to happen very soon, hopefully, and those plugs are in progress of getting installed. What that's meant is that we've increased the number of level 2 plugs available to New Yorkers and others by over 6 times, and the number of DCFC plugs available by over 2.5 times since the beginning of the program, which is quite a lot of plugs. With that, we've developed cost savings of over 300 million when you look at our level 2 incentive budget, our DCFC incentive budget, and our future proofing budget that we're expecting to have by the end of the programs. And that's all savings that we were able to do while working within the program parameters and looking to use those to inform future parts of the program. However, with all of this amazing work that the utilities have done, DPS has done, many of the stakeholders in the room have participated in a lot of that work, as well as our communities and customers, there's still a lot more we need to do to be able to effectively meet the goals of our state and the New York Climate Scope Plan outlined targets. So first is that while we are starting to provide a very good service of EV charging to our customers and stakeholders across the state, we definitely still need more as the number of EVs grows throughout New York and the EVs that come into New York on a daily basis. And access to charging is also a very huge priority. Data across many segments, but we have some highlighted data here, shows that access to charging is the primary barrier for adoption. And the Make Ready program is a key way that we can help alleviate that barrier and help enable more customers to adopt EVs. So overall, these infrastructure incentives have been crucial to our work so far, and they will continue to be crucial as we grow the number of chargers that are out there in New York State. We can go to the next slide. So a preview of some of the key learnings that we'll talk about more is really how this program has been very successful so far. And then there are a lot of minor components that we really want to grow within the program to make it even more successful in the years to come. So one of the first modifications that we had in the midpoint was we updated the baseline incentives for the contracts. And with that, we saw an increase in the number of contracts, commitments, and plugs that are coming into the program since that midpoint. Another crucial learning that we've had so far is that continuity of the program and its availability to our customers is key to have a stable market and to allow various stakeholders in the market to participate and grow the number of chargers. We have some data to support that from our learnings in Orange and Rockland service territory, as well as some other experiences as well. Additionally, we've learned that providing charging where the vehicle is domiciled, and in many cases that's a multi-unit dwelling for our customers in New York, is a crucial segment to ensure that these customers have access to charging for the bulk of their needs, as well as at a usually a fairly affordable price for them. And so the work we've done in the multi-unit dwelling segment is critical and something we really want to continue going forward. The disadvantaged communities, or DAC incentives that we've offered that Katie explained earlier, have been very influential in help driving the installation of chargers in the disadvantaged communities, providing support to low-income residents and other places that might not normally have seen chargers come to their areas. And so we really want to continue that model of having a specialized DAC incentive, and also want to look at how we could use that similar model to potentially drive other state goals to ensure that everyone has access to the charging that they will need. And finally, we did explore with some flexibility that we have within our program offering and within the confines of what the Commission has approved, that has allowed the utilities to highlight certain areas, prioritize certain behaviors or specific types of plugs, area plugs, speed that they get developed. We've been able to help use that to deliver on the program goals and provide value to our customers. And we felt that this was a pretty effective method of doing that, and we would like to see that expanded and continued going forward. Overall, the program has been a very effective program that we can see with our plug goals, and we really want to see that continue as we provide the incremental infrastructure needs going forward into 2030 and beyond. So that's just some of the highlighted key points that we'll get to in the next few minutes. So with that, I'll start off with some of the numbers. So when we first started to convene in 2020, we had approximately 2,700 level 2 plugs and about 470 DCFC plugs available in the joint utility service territories. Since then, with all the hard work of everybody on this call and many, many more, we've grown that number of plugs all the way up to about 18,000 level 2s and over 1,200 DCFC plugs. And that's been crucial to supporting the nearly 2,000 EVs that are operating in the joint utility service territories. What that expansion has meant is that we have over 6 times as many level 2 plugs as we did when we started, and over 2.5 times as many DCFC plugs, and many more still yet to come that are in commitment with the various programs. Overall, this has been a huge accomplishment of the Make Ready program, and we really want to see it continue so that we can continue to provide the service that we'll need as we drive past 2,000 EVs on our roads. You can go to the next slide. So here's a further breakdown of some of the statuses between the upstate utilities and the downstate utilities. So as we're going forward in this presentation, you'll hear us refer to the downstate utilities, which is the Con Edison and Orange and Rockland, as well as the upstate utilities, which covers National Grid, NYSEG, Rochester Gas and Electric, and Central Hudson. And so what you see in each of these charts, the blue section is our completed plugs and budget. The light blue is the contracted plugs or budget, so those that are in progress, going to be installed soon. And green is the remaining gap of the plug target, and then the associated budget that we'd expect to need for that remaining gap. And what you see is, if you look side by side in each one of these charts, is that the numbers on the left with the plugs is bigger than the number on the right with the budget. That's because we've been able to, on average, have some cost savings on the projects. Now, what that does mean is not every project has been able to provide cost savings, and many projects still do need up to the baseline incentives or more. However, where it's been possible, the joint utilities, the installers, developers, and customers have worked together to find some cost containment opportunities to help reduce the burden of the program. So overall, we're expected to save about 20% and 7% for downstate and upstate on level 2 plugs, and we're estimating around a 40% savings for DCFC plugs across the JU. That's been a huge component of the program, helping us not only drive EV adoption, but also make it more affordable in New York State. Some of the ways that we've been able to make that happen have included doing detailed reviews with our customers and our contractors and our installers as we're getting ready to pay the incentives to make sure that we've got all the right costs accounted for. And even before that, upfront, site assessments, particularly for fleets, as well as just doing advisory work with fleets and all customers that are coming through our programs, has helped us identify potential projects where we may not need as many upgrades, or maybe we can use load limiting options or other solutions that can help lower the cost of the project altogether. And that's helped save further costs. Additionally, this slide doesn't have the future-proofing savings, which while many customers have taken advantage of future-proofing, it's not fully subscribed at this point. So overall, we've been able to really drive towards our goals, as you can see by the amount of completion of the plugs, while still generating savings for our customers. So with that, I will pass it back to Grace.
Thank you, Josh. This is Grace Kirkpatrick through Allison Gow's speaker. So as Josh mentioned, we currently have about 199,000 EVs on the road in the JU service territories today. And we are expecting a high amount of growth in EV adoption in the coming years. Based on state policies to meet emission reduction targets through the climate scoping plan, as well as to comply with Advanced Clean Cars 2, we expect that the number of EVs on the road in 2035 will be 15 times higher than it is today, so about 5 million EVs on the road. And to support that level of EV adoption, it'll be important to maintain or improve upon the current charging experience that our customers have in our service territories. And this will require the scaling up of EVSC deployment. So if you imagine a scenario in which there are no plugs that are installed beyond the maximum plug targets set forward in the Make Ready program, then each L2 plug would have to support over 7 times the number of EVs in 2035 versus what it does today. And each DCFC plug would have to support over 3 times the number of EVs in 2035 versus today. So this would put a strain on that customer charging experience and could lead to situations where they're queuing at public charging stations or garages that have to turn away EV drivers looking for charging access. And as we'll touch upon in the next couple of slides, convenient and accessible charging is a priority for that next wave of EV adopters and something that they'll consider as they make that EV lease or purchase decision. Next slide, please. So even with the current charging experience, we have found evidence within our service territories that access to EV charging is still a barrier. Specifically, we wanted to highlight an example from Con Edison's service territory where we recently did a survey of customers. About 2/3 of the customers surveyed cited EV charging access as a key barrier to owning or leasing an EV. And this was the most commonly cited factor, more commonly cited than other factors like vehicle cost or vehicle range. When asked to click down further into what specifically about charging access was a concern, these customers replied that they felt that there were not enough charging stations, that it can take too long to charge, and lastly, that they were concerned about being able to charge at their residence. And this last reason about being able to charge at their residence, this is a concern within Con Edison's service territory in particular, as many of our customers live in multi-unit dwellings. So that access to at-home charging is something that is a priority within the service territory. And this overall theme of charging access has also been reflected in other surveys done nationally as well as statewide. Specifically, we wanted to highlight a survey done by NYSERDA on EV drivers in the state that found a similar proportion of EV drivers citing charging access as a key challenge to owning an EV in the state. Next slide, please. And lastly, we wanted to, as we've highlighted that charging access is a priority for drivers, we also wanted to think about who the next EV adopters might be in the state. And we found that this survey from BCG completed last year nationally was a helpful framing for how to think about this question. Specifically, the survey found that under 10% of respondents were currently EV owners. So they're that first early adopters bucket of EV drivers. And then this survey also categorized 2 waves of adoption that we thought would be helpful to talk through today. Specifically, next wave adopters are about 40% of respondents that intend to buy or lease an EV as their next vehicle if their expectations are met around EVs. And then secondly, the longer term adopters, who form about 30% of respondents that would want to drive an EV as their primary vehicle, but in the near term do not plan to buy or lease an EV. And as we think about this framing as for the JU service territories, we are still in that early adopters part of the market with about 199,000 EVs on the road. However, it's important to keep the framing of the next wave adopters and longer term adopters in mind and what their needs and wants are around charging. Specifically for the next wave adopters, for that 40%, to unlock that 40%, they're looking for convenient charging. They do not want to have to go on a detour from their destination or residence or their route to charge. Building off of that convenience factor, they're also looking for faster charging solutions. And then for that longer term 30%, those drivers are less likely to have access to at-home charging. So publicly accessible charging will be very important for these drivers. Additionally, as I mentioned before, they're looking to use an EV as their primary vehicle. So they will want to have a variety of charging use cases to support having an EV as their primary vehicle. So overall, convenient, accessible charging is top of mind as we look to unlock the next waves of EV adoption. So as we've spoken through what the program has achieved so far, and as we look to support the next waves of adoption in the state, I'm now going to pass it back over to Katie Zellner to talk through more about our program learnings and considerations.
Great, thank you so much, Grace. So with that context of what's happening in terms of EVSC deployment and EV adoption across the JU service territories, I wanted to share some learnings and reflections on our program so far, now that we've been in operation for about 4 years. Next slide, please. So one key learning since the midpoint order was released is that the incentives at the new baseline that were approved during the midpoint have been effective in accelerating EVSC deployments. And we're using a Con Edison case study here on the left-hand side of the screen to really showcase where we saw a market increase in contracts for new level 2 plugs and new DCFC plugs being installed in our service territory. So what you see is on the left-hand side of the screen, the light blue color represents contracts that were given to customers for the installation of these plugs pre-midpoint. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the number of contracts offered to customers at the higher baseline post-midpoint. And the number of months represented, or the time elapsed represented in green, is about 1/3 of the time that elapsed pre-midpoint. So you see that there were about double the number of commitments or new contracts issued for fast charging plugs in 1/3 of the time that followed that midpoint order and is what we're calling the post-midpoint period. We also saw a lot of traction on the level 2 side. Just about 90% of the number of commitments that were made pre-midpoint were made post-midpoint, and again, about 1/3 of the amount of time elapsed. And what that really means in terms of pace is that on the DCFC side, we were issuing contracts at a rate of about 46 per month post-midpoint, as opposed to 9 per month pre-midpoint. And then if you look at the level 2 side, about 530 contracts issued per month post-midpoint versus 215 pre-midpoint. And so these types of trends are really important as we think about the future of the program. And we want to recognize that especially for sites that are deserving of and needing of more upgrades, given the capacity constraints, that those sites are going to continue to incur more expenses in order to make those upgrades possible. And that's a trend we're seeing, especially at direct current fast charging public sites in the Con Edison service territory. So moving forward, what does this mean? In the future, we anticipate installations requiring the same level of incentives to meet customers' requirements for how they want to charge and the convenience that they're expecting. We saw in the slides that Grace presented that about just over 50% of EV drivers are relying on charging at the curb or public fast charging. And so we'll need to continue to develop those types of publicly accessible sites. And then we're also going to continue to see demand and interest as spurred on by New York City policy in the Con Edison service territory. The Green Rides initiatives has brought a meaningful number of electric vehicle users and onto the road, with about 44 million EV rideshare trips completed in 2024. And local law 55 also is expected to increase the interest in installing EV chargers. And I'll take us to the next slide now and hand it over to Brendan Gallagher from Orange and Rockland, who will talk about the effects of a pause in incentives.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, so O&R over the last year found ourselves as an interesting case study. In February of 2024, we reached our level 2 plug target, which resulted in a pause in our level 2 side of the program for roughly 1 year, while waiting for a ruling on the level 2 petition to continue beyond our plug target. During this time, we saw fewer committed projects, and essentially level 2 installations in our territory practically disappear. So looking at the data on the left-hand side, you can see a breakout of some of our plugs in the program before the pause, dating back to 2022, where you can see generally an increasing interest and plug commitments up until the pause in February of 2024, where there was a substantial drop off and no longer any committed plugs after that point. On the right-hand side, there's a breakout of the plugs in our pipeline after the program pause, where we had over 700 plugs in our wait list, primarily after the announcement of the L2 petition ruling. Prior to that, there were only roughly around 200 to 250 plugs in our wait list. And upon the announcement of that, we saw a sharp increase in our wait list with the announcement of the ability to continue beyond that plug target. During this time, we only saw about 31 plugs continue on with their projects without incentives. 158 plugs withdrew their applications from the wait list due to uncertainty in the results of the petition and where incentives would be moving forward. And the wait list outside of that was around a little over 500 plugs there. So during this time, we saw a couple interesting things. With a program pause, interest and installations in our territory came to practically a halt. But with the announcement of new incentives and continuing beyond our plug target, even at a lower incentive rate, saw a spike in interest again, with our wait list growing very quickly in the subsequent couple of months after that announcement. Now we'll pass it back off on the next slide.
Thank you, Brendan. So the next topic we're going to talk about is multi-unit dwellings. Multi-unit dwellings are a very important customer base for our EV program. Citing back to some of the slides that Grace was presenting earlier, one of the key barriers is having access to charging and having reliable access to charging at home. And so for many New Yorkers, multi-unit dwellings can be that solution. So on the chart on the left, you can see the percentage of the level 2 plugs that have been installed or are in some cases contracted of the overall level 2 plugs by the various utilities. And one of the interesting points to note is that we would expect that these numbers to continue to increase into the future as MUDs have become a larger part of our program as time has continued. While that has been a big success in being able to start to reach the multi-unit dwellings and getting level 2 charging available for these customers, there's still a lot of way to go in this space, and we still need to continue to support multi-unit dwellings and really any location where vehicles are getting domiciled and have that long-term overnight parking, which is also usually the lowest cost way that the owner of the vehicle or the driver of the vehicle can charge that vehicle. So looking on the right, you can see a sampling of some of the service territories where in general, we've only reached somewhere around 2 to 3% of the multi-unit dwellings in our service territories. There's quite a lot of room to go, especially as we want to move past the early adopters into some of the rest of the market. And they'll continue to need support to make those plugs become a reality. Another very interesting one is on the level 2 side, being in a disadvantaged community and being a MUD is one of the ways that a customer can get that 100% incentive tier. And in reconnaissance and service territory, once we had fully subscribed the DAC budget for level 2 plugs, there started to build quite a large wait list of plugs, over 350 of them, waiting for that DAC incentive to potentially return or have more funding allocated to it. So with that, we just want to continue to reinforce that the MUD segment is very crucial to the level 2 market and a great way for our customers to have access to reliable, low-cost charging. That we can move to the next slide. A related topic is the disadvantaged communities or DAC incentive tier. For both level 2s and multi-unit dwellings, as well as DCFC public plugs, those projects may be eligible for up to 100% of their costs. And this has actually been a very popular segment within the New York market. So we've seen a lot of success, as you can see in the upstate grouping. 40% of our committed and completed plugs are in that DAC tier and has resulted in quite a few DCFC plugs becoming available in disadvantaged communities. Within National Grid, interestingly enough, we've only committed or completed 38% of our overall DCFC incentive budget, but we've already committed or completed about 95% of our disadvantaged community incentive level budget, meaning that we are far outpacing commitments in disadvantaged communities with DCFCs over general DCFC commitments. That incentive tier has been very helpful for driving plugs to be installed in disadvantaged communities. And so the joint utilities are really looking to the future of how we can leverage a similar model to help drive some of the other priorities of the state. So we definitely would like to continue using an enhanced incentive model for disadvantaged communities and curbside charging, which also does have an opportunity there, but also looking at potentially charging deserts and even other categories. And as the comment period progresses, we would really encourage stakeholders to share if there are other certain communities or attributes about charging stations they feel should be eligible for an enhanced incentive tier. So feel free to share those with DPS or the utilities. We can pass them along to DPS or put them in comments as the comment period progresses. And with that, I think I pass it back to Katie.
Yes, thank you, Josh. So a final learning that we wanted to share here is that the current structure of the Make Ready program allows the utilities to have flexibility to offer incentive adders or bonuses that support positive behaviors and really allow us to make sure that we're getting the most value of every incentive dollar allocated to a customer project. And what I mean by flexibility here is that the joint utilities are given for each service territory a level 2 target and a DCFC target and a corresponding budget that is that is informed by a baseline on a per plug or a per kilowatt basis in the case of DCFC, per plug in the case of L2 chargers. And at the end of the program, the average of all of the plugs incentivized, the per plug incentive offered will equal that baseline on average. But on a plug by plug basis, we as program administrators here at the Joint Utilities have the flexibility to offer incentives above the baseline or below the baseline, just ensuring that at the end of the program, we're coming in at that average in terms of incentive per plug. And so what that flexibility to shift above or below the baseline has afforded us is to really use a concept of adders or bonuses that are going to motivate plug deployment, motivate customer behavior to deliver on our goals quickly and efficiently, delivering the most value per incentive dollar contracted. In Con Edison service territory, we have an adder or a bonus for the level 2 projects that are installed and paid out in under 6 months. That bonus was very successful, with about 80% of eligible L2 plugs on track to receive or already having received that adder. And so successful, in fact, that we ultimately reduced the number of months from 6 months to 3 months for the threshold of earning that adder. Additionally, there is a limited time adder for DCFC sites that are public and have 6 or more plugs. And lastly, National Grid has a adder that is called the Act Now bonus, where sites that are installed before September of this year are eligible, and they are on track to offer that adder to about 40 projects or 200 DCFC plugs. And there's an illustration here on the bottom left-hand side of the screen that illustrates how the Con Edison level 2 adder works. So you can see the gray bar represents an incentive floor or a base. That $10,000 amount would be for a DAC benefiting level 2 plug, receiving the 100% level or up to 100% level incentive. And then from there, a project would be eligible for stackable bonuses or adders, $2,000 for the speed bonus, or $3,000 for projects that include 25 plugs or more. And that adds up to $15,000 as the max possible incentive, but you'll notice that our average incentive per level 2 plug across the program since releasing this adder is only $8,600. So we are not offering the full $15,000 to every single plug that comes through our pipeline. We're only offering that amount to the projects that are showing that they are going to be completed in a speedy manner and really accelerating our ability to hit our goals and deliver value on this program. So what that means for the future, if we look to the right-hand side of the screen, we recommend having a continued flexibility in the incentive design, where we do have the ability to target specific customer needs or site type needs. One need that we anticipate is that the time to complete and the cost to complete DCFC projects, particularly projects that are appropriate for public access, are going to increase. So we expect to see longer timelines and more cost as potential sites for public DCFC charging are more and more often capacity constrained. And lastly, we just want to recognize that in the face of some of the policy goals that are on record for New York State, speedy deployment is going to be a priority. So that wraps up our learning section and what I have to offer, particularly on the flexibility of the budget and target structure. So with that, we can go to our next section. So this section is really going to be a snapshot of the status of the Make Ready programs, both the direct current fast charging program and the level 2 program. And the data is organized by downstate and upstate. We'll go to the next slide and I'll just give a quick overview here. So overall, when we look at this status update across our programs, we can see that the program enhancements made at the endpoint or through the midpoint order, including the enhanced baseline incentives and the targets that were increased, are working. They are encouraging us to continue to deploy plugs and to do so at a fast and increasing clip. And we are recommending that we continue with that overall structure as the program continues. And you know, TBD on the timing of how long the program continues, but for example, through 2030. So a few call outs here. Downstate, I did want to call out that level 2 plugs are deployed across a mix of incentive tiers, so you'll see that. But the majority of level 2 plugs in the downstate service territories of Con Edison and Orange and Rockland are serving multi-unit dwellings or MUDs. And over half of the DCFC plugs are deployed at public settings, including those public settings located in disadvantaged communities or DACs. Upstate, we see that level 2 plugs are deployed largely at public sites, with commercial installations being most prominent for fleets and businesses. And similarly, over half of their fast charging plugs are also deployed at public sites, including in disadvantaged communities. JUY, the DCFC plug power on a kW per plug basis is increasing or has increased over the life of the program. And we're also seeing what I mentioned earlier, which is the kind of low-hanging fruit, capacity available sites are less available across the joint utility service territories, meaning there's less capacity at prospective charging sites. And this is especially true for DCFC public sites. So with that summary, I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Allison Gao, to walk through the downstate program status.
Great, thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. I'm gonna walk through the progress of the downstate make-ready programs. So starting with L2 here on the left, looking at completed and under contract plugs combined, which are the green and blue bars here, we are now at 79% of the midpoint order plug target, using about 67% of the authorized budget. And as Josh said earlier, multi-unit dwellings or MUDs, it's an important segment in the L2 program. In Con Edison's service territory, MUDs account for 75% of the L2 install and committed combined. And in ONR, that's 65%. And you can see that in the black and gray bar here that over half of the L2s are installed in private sites. So they are in the up to 50% incentive tier. In New York City, though, I just want to note that we are seeing MUDs featuring garages that provide parking to the general public. So this business model is quite common here in the city. And in those situations, they are eligible for the up to 90% tier. On the DCFC side on the right here, if you look at committed and under contract combined, we've reached a little over 1,100 plugs. The midpoint order expanded the downstate target significantly. We reached our 2020 order plug target last year. So just wanted to add some context here on where we are now and the 2025 target. Looking at the gray bars here, over 60% of the DCFC plugs are installed in public sites, and 1/3 of the plugs they are in the enhanced tier, meaning they're publicly accessible in disadvantaged communities. And also just taking a closer look at DCFC usage type, in the downstate programs, we're seeing that parking lots and workplaces are two key locations for DCFC usage. In Con Edison service territory, we also see charging at retail spaces, which house publicly available charging stations. So overall, we are seeing DCFC plugs being placed in a wider variety of locations. Next slide, please. And then just additional numbers here on DCFC and L2. So starting with the small table here on the left, for the DCFC program, the average number of plug per site is 6, with each plug having a nameplate capacity of 112 kWm power output. We are seeing that plugs are becoming more powerful, and we expect this trend to continue. In the L2 program, the plugs are less powerful, but they house greater number of plugs. So the blended average between Con Edison and ONR, we're looking at about 22 plugs per site. And then moving on to the table on the right here, it's helpful to read the numbers here from top to bottom. So looking at the cost first and then comparing that to the incentive covered, we are seeing that in both programs, in ONR and Con Edison, the average incentive is covering about 60% of the average eligible cost. And it's the same thing for the level 2 program, the blended average incentive being $8,400 per plug, and that's covering about 65% of the eligible cost. And then 2 notes that I want to call out here. Con Edison's Make Ready program data shows that service inadequate DCFC sites cost 50% more on average than adequate sites due to service upgrades needed. So the additional work here do drive up the cost significantly. And then last point here is that we are seeing that low-hanging fruit DCFC sites are becoming less common. So in Con Ed's program, between 2023 and 2024, we found that the proportion of service adequate DCFC plugs relative to service inadequate plugs dropped by 26%. And then a very similar story here in ONR's program, recent service ruling for DCFC sites all have been service inadequate. So what that means is that we can expect to see more expensive, costly DCFC sites coming in the future. And I'm going to pass it over to Josh.
Thanks, Allison. So looking at similar numbers for the upstate utilities, there are a couple of highlights within here. First is the importance of multi-unit dwellings. That's a big part of our program on the level 2 side, and on the DCFC side, we've seen a variety of trends coming forward. But starting with the level 2 side, you can see that we have completed over 7,700 level 2 plugs across the upstate utilities, with another 2,600 under contract. And on the DCFC side, we've got over 850 DCFC plugs installed, with another 440 in contract. Again, we've been able to do this while generating some savings, particularly on the DCFC side, by coming in under baseline when it's appropriate with the customers. One of the big things to see is we have a very large uptake in public sites. We have only a very small portion of our level 2 programs have opted to have private, the up to 50% tier, while that 72% on the level 2 side of up to 90% is quite a large chunk of our level 2 plugs, which consists both of public sites as well as some of the multi-unit dwellings that have chosen to make their plugs available to be used by anyone in the community. As well as we've also got that 17% of MUDs in the disadvantaged communities that are helping support those communities as well. On the DCFC side, like we discussed earlier, a very large draw towards the public, and even more so towards the DAC funding group, with over 84% of our plugs being public DCFC plugs. And as we're moving forward, we've started to see some interesting trends with those programs. But really what it's showing is that those increased incentive amounts for offering public stations has been crucial for many of our customers to continue forward. So going on to the next slide with some more of the numbers. We'll start with the level 2 side. So you can see with level 2s, we're averaging around 6 plugs per site across the upstate utilities, though that has seen a very slight but generous increase over time from the beginning of the program to now, as customers are looking to put slightly larger installations as more vehicles are out there, as we've also had more multi-unit dwellings coming to the program, which tend to desire a few more plugs than some of the public parking lots for level 2s. And additionally, we've started to see higher powered level 2s come in as customers are being made aware of some of the different options they have when it comes to EVSEs. On the DCFC side, from the project side, we've also seen sort of an interesting curve when it comes to project size and power per plug. Early in the program, our program was dominated by highway public fast charging sites, which tended to have more plugs per site and higher power that many of you have seen out there across upstate New York. As we got around the midpoint and a little bit afterwards, we started to see more car dealerships start to enter the game and become a larger part of the mix, which started to drop our averages down as they tended to need fewer plugs and slightly less powered plugs. Now we're starting to see that trend start to reverse again, as we're just seeing a wider participation across the market. Some more highway fast chargers are coming in, as well as continued projects at car dealerships, and now more other commercial properties, such as shopping locations and destination locations, are starting to add fast chargers to their sites. On the incentive side, our level 2 costs have continually ticked up just a little bit every year over year in terms of cost per plug. And so the midpoint baseline increase was very helpful to make many more projects financially viable. And we'll need to continue to monitor that as we go forward into future offerings. On the DCFC side, one of the interesting changes at the midpoint was that now the upstate utilities had different baseline incentive tiers for our DCFC plugs, as you can see in the bottom row of the graph, or of the table on the right. That has caused an interesting market conundrum, where sometimes projects will decide to move between service territories based on those incentive amounts, because much of upstate New York is actually a bit of a puzzle between the 4 upstate utilities. So in some cases, it's not too hard to move 10 miles down the road and be in a different electric service territory. Overall, we've seen a variety of costs, but continuing to monitor those, as it can vary widely with a lot of characteristics of the projects, which has meant that flexible incentive strategies can be very helpful for us to help right size and make sure there's sufficient capacity at the sites that we are doing. But overall, one of the important things for the upstate utilities going forward will be having a level playing field on the baselines is helpful for us. Also makes it much simpler for some of our partners who are out there working, while having flexibility to help drive plug deployments in the various segments and use cases that we need across upstate New York. With that, we're going to spin over to the Load Management Technology Incentive Program, LMTIP, to talk a little bit about its progress so far. So the biggest piece here is that we've had quite a bit of interest from many stakeholders across New York, and many of those stakeholders, thank you for joining onto this call as well, to participate. And we're excited to hear some of your feedback as well. So far, it is a pretty new program, but we've gotten a lot of interest. And so far, our only committed and completed projects are in the software category. And that's mainly just because software can often be added on to an existing active electric vehicle charging station, or it can be modified into the scope of a construction project fairly simply and easy to continue to pass forward on a short time frame. On the flip side, the hardware, energy storage, and integrated energy storage EVSE takes a little bit more work. So we are hoping to have some more commitments and paid projects throughout the rest of this year and into the future. But we have a lot of sort of pre-application interest. And in many cases, some of these pre-applications are actually going through additional utility processes around connection and getting set up with the electrical grid. So overall, a lot of interest from a variety of parties and a variety of site types, different developers, different site hosts, different end use customers, different applications that they're looking for. And we're excited to see where this program takes us in the next couple of years. With that, I will pass it back to Katie.
Great. Thank you, Josh. So just to wrap us up here on our program status and what we're thinking about for the future, we really want to emphasize that it's important to preserve the momentum that we've developed in the market by offering these incentives and partnering closely with our customers. Some considerations that could help us further that momentum and preserve it for the future. 2 points here. The first is we encourage, during the review process, we encourage the exploration of the idea of budget fungibility and flexibility across plug type budgets. So for example, you could have fungibility across level 2 and DCFC, disadvantaged community budgets, still preserving different baselines for level 2 plugs versus DCFC plugs, but thinking about how can you minimize instances where you have a wait list for those enhanced incentives that are designed to benefit disadvantaged communities. And one way to do that would be to have budget fungibility across those 2 categories of plugs. Additionally, we encourage the consideration of the future-proofing budget and where that there could be flexibility for deploying that future-proofing budget after a certain number of commitments without future proofing are made, and we kind of know the plans of future projects and have commitments for those future projects and understand where customers are choosing or not choosing to use future proofing incentives. And then lastly, this last bullet here, we are thinking about the market evolving. You know, we saw that we're projected to have much increased EV adoption across the state as we aim for the CLCPA scoping plan targets or the AC2 EV adoption targets. And we want to be cognizant that we're still in a nascent market and the market is evolving. And so with that in mind, it would be helpful to get stakeholder input on the right mix of plugs, L2 versus DCFC, and when we could expect trends in the mix of plugs changing over time. And last thought there is, you know, we want to make sure that we're accommodating demand and market-driven approaches in this program. So with that, that wraps up the considerations that we have here for the future. We can go to the next section here, and I'll turn it back to DPS staff to help monitor the Q&A.
All right, thank you all for that very thorough presentation. So we have a few questions in the Q&A already. We'll start with a question from Adam Reuter, which I believe was related to the ONR pause. Is it possible that installations continued that didn't require service upgrades once the program paused?
Hi, Adam. Sorry, just reading it one more time. I guess, is the question asking that installations continued after the program pause because they were planning on it regardless?
Hey, Brendan, this is Katie from Con Edison. I think Adam, part of what of Adam's question is, you know, can an EV charger be installed without going to the utility? You know, does every site get studied? And I can let you speak to that, but what Brendan's slide showed is that there were 31 plugs that did go through study, a mix of service adequate and inadequate, and only those 31 plugs chose to go through the study and go through the installation process without incentives.
Yes, Katie, that's correct. And regarding your interpretation of the question, we do require every project that comes to us to go through that study. Now, does that speak for projects that may not reach out to us? That does not. But if they do come to us for incentives, we require them to go through that study because while a site may seem adequate based on the capacity locally on that site, it does not account for what our circuit can handle, such as transformer upgrades, and things like that. So we do require the study for every project that comes through our door there.
Yeah, thanks. I think they unmuted me, and if you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you.
Yeah, I guess the question was, assuming that there aren't incentives available, then people may have just gone ahead and done installations either as part of a new build where they were building a new building anyways, and they just didn't bother contacting you because there weren't incentives available, or maybe they didn't, as I was saying, maybe they didn't require upgrades, for a 4 or 6 plug level 2 site. They may not have needed upgrades. So I guess I was just wondering if you had looked at other metrics to see if what the level of installations were over that time period.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if nobody reached out to us to begin with, it's hard to kind of track those. However, based on applications that came through our new business group, through our incentive side of the program, and just communications with developers that were reaching out that may have not joined the wait list, we did have a lot of communication reach out, asking what's the status of the wait list, what's the status of the level 2 program. Always guided them to join the wait list in case incentives were coming through, but we did not see any sort of continued increase in interest through our side of the program or our new business group relating to level 2 programs once the program was on pause there.
Okay, and I will just hop to Adam's other question here. I believe this is more general. In the up to 50% tier, what is the split between proprietary plugs versus non-public plugs? Don't both of those push a project into that tier?
Yeah, Lindsay, I can start by answering that for National Grid. It may be different for the other utilities. Early in our program, there were some fast charging providers that were using one of the proprietary plug types, and they received 50% incentives. But since then, most of the especially the highway fast charging, has been either using built-in adapter systems to provide CCS, or done the option where you have an equal to or more of the non-proprietary plugs than the proprietary. So if you had 3 proprietary plugs and 3 non-proprietary plugs, and they're all the same power, you would be considered you could still be a public plug. So that's what we've seen more. On the level 2 side, at least for National Grid, we have not seen a lot in the proprietary. Most of those plugs are truly private. There are a variety of use cases where customers have chosen to do private plugs, whether it's just for like a light duty fleet, or maybe it's a property that didn't want to open their plugs up to others, or various other reasons why they'd want to. And but I'd say the majority, without being able to give statistics, has been the not it's not the proprietary that's taking it to 50%. It's the is it public taking it to 50%.
And just to echo what Josh said, similar story with our direct current fast charging proprietary plugs. A few applications early in the program, but at this point, virtually no proprietary treatment of plugs for our DCFC fast charging sites. And similarly, the reason that on our level 2 side, we're seeing a majority of plugs with the 50% level treatment is because they're located at MUDs or other privately accessible parking locations. And I can just respond to Zach's question on for at least for Con Edison's service territory on the bidirectional charging equipment that have requested make-ready funding. It's a small number of projects. I would say a handful, less than between 5 and 10, less than 10 projects that are seeking to install bidirectional EV charging equipment.
Katie, on that note, on that same question, at least for National Grid, I'm not personally aware of any significant number of projects that have requested it. There have definitely been some that have explored or considered it, but I'm not sure if we've ever actually moved forward with an application. Most of the discussion that we've had in the bidirectional spaces actually moved more towards the medium and heavy duty pilot or the medium and heavy duty proceeding, and with that customer base showing more interest in discussions with our team.
Okay, thank you. And then we'll just go to Zach's other question. When a site doesn't have adequate electrical capacity, do the JUs refer the customer to LMTIP?
Yeah, Lindsay, for National Grid, that's definitely something that we've started to look at. It's still pretty new, so I can't say that there have been a ton of opportunities for it, but is definitely something that we're working in as we sort of discuss all the options for the customers of what is available to them to help meet their needs. There are quite a few options. LMTIP could be a solution. There are also potentially opportunities around right sizing the amount of charging or thinking about how much charging do they need. Not saying that we're saying no, you can't have this, but sometimes there's we can help them sort of think about charging throughout the day. A lot of this is covered in our fleet assessment work as well.
Okay. So our next question from Maria Fields: Do you have unused budget for the LMTIP programs? Does the extension being considered include an expansion of the budget or follow-up review to consider expansion as program utilization expands? I'm going to pass to my colleague Rob Cully to answer that one.
Hi there. So right now, as we understand it, there is some additional unspent budget that is presently available, though the existing authorization for the LMTIP program only extends to the extent of those unspent previously collected per plug incentive program funds. So the main question that we're trying to answer as part of this review process for the LMTIP is essentially whether additional funds should be authorized for that program after the original funds are fully expended.
All right, thanks, Rob. So that is the last question we have in our queue currently. We'll give it another minute in case anyone has other questions before we hit on next steps.
Lindsay, this is Josh from National Grid. The one thing we'll add is as the joint utilities, we do maintain a website to track our budget progress for both the Make Ready program and LMTIP. I think the first LMTIP update should happen in the next month or so. So stay tuned to the Joint Utilities website for more details about how far we are with the budget.
Alrighty, okay, we have a follow-up question on LMTIP. What is the rationale for not referring customers in capacity-constrained sites to LMTIP? How else are utilities informing customers about LMTIP?
Hey, Zach, this is Katie Zellner from Con Edison. Just wanted to echo what Josh said earlier, which is the programs launched late last year, and now that the LMTIP programs are live, we are referring customers who have capacity constrained sites to LMTIP if it works for their needs. And the site assessment and advisory conversations are one of the primary vehicles that the JU has at their disposal to really understand the customer's needs, talk about what's going to work for them, and refer them to the LMTIP incentives. Josh, anything you want to add, please do.
No, I think that's pretty much it. It's often just working with the customer to figure out what works for them and their situation. It can vary very widely. Thanks.
All right, last call for questions today. All right, well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us today for our kickoff meeting. So just the quick next steps, we mentioned these before, but once again, the LMTIP comments are due on March 28th. Filings relating to that are under case 22E0236 on the department's document and matter management system. That's where you can find that notice that has the stakeholder questions for you to respond to. Make Ready program comments are due April 11th. And filings related to that program are under case 18E0138, again, including the notice with all of those questions for you. If you have any questions at all, you can always contact staff at evse@dps.ny.gov. All right, thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.